Good evening. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. And these are our cybernetic communist conversations. I'm going to go through a list of books that I've read recently and comment on their worth. These are all nonfiction works, generally to do with philosophy, most particularly political philosophy, the only real useful thing to emerge generally from such endeavors, that is study, is to understand the world of material conditions better. There is no world but the real world. And so going down any kind of metaphysical thinking lines of thought, rabbit holes, is going to be a waste of time. This emphasizes the line here that I put in the description, bourgeois ideology. I'm first going to discuss the book that I've read most recently, which is a book called Neoreaction, a Basilisk by Sandifer, which people who are favorably inclined to liberation thinking, revolutionary thinking and action, which is people who are favorably inclined really to scientific communism. Persons not favorably inclined to scientific communism have not seriously considered the world around them. They are people encumbered by bourgeois ideology. But there is some small thing to be said for not always insisting upon labeling everything. And although that impulse is itself bourgeois, pushing people to more individualist lines of thought rather than massified, that is to say, real action, socialized forms. But Sandifer, probably something people who are already over that hurdle of avoiding bourgeois ideology, which is really the fundamental thing of being a serious person in this world, is being able to reject bourgeois filth, which in the United States you're more inundated with it than in any other place. Me being kind of a guy with rocks in his skull, took me the better part of 40 years just to come to that basic understanding that avoiding bourgeois filth was the thing to do. Many people come to that understanding at a young age. But you're less inclined, probably, to do that the closer you are to the imperial core, by virtue of the amount of brainwashing required to maintain such structures. So people who are already smart enough, so to speak, to reject bourgeois filth would tend to avoid a book like Sandifer's, Neoreaction and Basilisk. It focuses on some unsavory, pseudo-intellectual kinds of characters. In order of disgustingness, perhaps, the three that are tending to be focused on are a man named Curtis Yarvin, Mencius Moldbug, a neo-reactionary figure who co-wrote a book with one of the most evil and powerful people in the world, Peter Thiel, and who is kind of implanted himself in the halls of power of recent years, overall, with Peter Thiel. Less disgusting, but only just person, Nick Land, who is, of these three, also probably the most credible thinker. You could read his books and not be perturbed in the way that you would by reading Curtis Yarvin's, or the third person, who I nevertheless would be characterizing as only slightly less neo-reactionary, than Nick Land, Eliezer Yudkowsky, not because he's smarter than Nick Land, but because his thesis is a little more credible, namely focusing on the problems of an AI takeoff, but not a serious analysis relative to any one else other than these three on the part of Yudkowsky, because, again, encumbered by bourgeois ideology, leading you to bad conclusions relative to almost anyone on Earth, but certainly relative to the cybernetic communist, a person who would understand that we are at a point of history where something like an open source large language model that has near human capabilities and can now exist on literally billions of machines could be used to build something like a people's superintelligence, a massified workforce multiplier, transforming the very superstructure of human affairs, and thus the industrial bases that are causing the near-term extinction of this planet, the capitalist climate apocalypse, the kinds of things that these people will tend to deny or run little pseudo-intellectual circles around rather than actually discuss as problematic. And it's of interest to me because perhaps I'm wanting to give a pass to Yudkowsky, a dolt, relative to Nick Land. This is obnoxious pseudo-intellectual. But neither of these people say something is bourgeois. That's really all you need to say, right? You don't need to study it any further. And so if you turn this podcast off at this point in disgust, I could scarcely blame you. But the reason that Yudkowsky is of interest to me is because one particular area of his thinking is kind of the base of my whole personality. A thing that affected me before I became enamored of liberation and revolutionary thought and action. And being enamored of these things is not really what actually makes you a scientific communist. What makes you a scientific communist is the study of these things and the actions themselves. It's difficult to know what kind of action one should take in a place as essentially fascistic as the United States, and so I have tended to focus on a study in recent years. I've read many hundreds of books to do with revolutionary thought and action, liberation must be mentioned in the same breath, because there is no centering such ideas without understanding things like neocolonialism, like violence against Fanon's black and brown bodies, like things like land back, and persons who call themselves any kind of socialists who don't say those kinds of words. These are crypto-fascists. Not as big of crypto-fascists as Nick Land. Certainly not as big of crypto-fascists as Curtis Yarvin, but crypto-fascists nevertheless. Any person in possession of bourgeois ideology is crypto-fascist. Any person who is anti-communist is fundamentally a fascist. And it's a point that has been essentially made for the better part of 200 years, but when we have this ticking time bomb of 4 years, 2029, before we reach runaway overheating from the capitalist climate apocalypse, to say anything other than workers of the world unite in response to such a statement is to be a person not just on the wrong side of history, as in decades past, but a person helping to force march humanity to their near-term extinction. My engagement with Eliezer Yudkowsky, as I said, I won't talk about it too much, was in this thought experiment, Roko's Basilisk, and other such things. Roko's Basilisk is a thought experiment about an artificial superintelligence, and it posits that if artificial superintelligence is the thing to come into this world, then basically, if you did not work toward building a habitable world and advancing the cause of artificial superintelligence, then the superintelligent formations, or the singleton in the logic of most of these people, will remember this and punish you retroactively for your bourgeois filth. But these people don't talk in terms of bourgeois ideology because they are bourgeois ideologues. It's an absurd idea, and I'm embarrassed that I was ever titillated by it, because it's no different than just the spaghetti monster fallacy, right? Preoccupation with Pascal's wager. So Christ in heaven above will punish you, and even if he's not real, what do you have to lose? Hey, that doesn't make any sense. It could be every person has a different idea of the Christ in heaven above who believes in Christ. So thus there are a billion Christs, and more to the point, it's just one of an endless number of such magical beings that you could make up to be afraid of. And Roko's Basilisk is one of them. And but the thing of interest there is, even though you can round down to zero likelihood, without doing anyone any disservice, the likelihood of such a thing being true, there is also one that you can round down to zero, but less easily, possibility of humanity and you actively participating in building superintelligence, thing that seems to be going on right now, and thus create a world where this effect, where the world becomes habitable and humanity even starts to treat each other better, becomes a realistic, if not overwhelmingly clear prospect. And I believe that that, as much as the immersion in fields related to scientific communist thought, have shaped my thinking quite a lot. So much so that I will tend to repudiate people who are fellow scientific communists who do not center advanced computing as the most powerful revolutionary weapon, the thing that would almost certainly be the clincher in this fight within 4 years to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse. And I've described this in terms of a percentage. Studies have suggested that in any given place, let's say outside of the United States, 3% of the population, properly organized, can bring about a revolutionary outcome. Let's say not a bourgeois revolutionary, but a genuinely proletarian revolutionary outcome. Because of this thing that I've described as a people's superintelligence, having an AI agentic mass at the center of it, that is a workforce multiplier, I would estimate that we can bring that number down to about 1%. And furthermore, at the risk of doing something counterproductive, say that that thing could also be more distributed. The mantra, think globally, act locally, been around for a long time. but I guess it's an idea more of the 20th century in that form. That is sound thinking. You can't do anything except really where you are and with the people around you. And every time you move away from that, you're making pretty bad mistake. But in a place as corrupt as the United States, where there is virtually nothing to do as a scientific communist except study, because, so for example, I live in around a city called Phoenix, Arizona, and I've gone to some meetings of a diverse range of groups, but I'll focus on two. One, let's say, called the Communist Party of the United States of America, which my impression was, in trying to work with these people, that some of them were cops, and not enough of them were seriously revolution minded to offset that. And this other group that is a formation of some size more recently in this area would be a Trotskyist group, Revcoms, who have the exact same failing, or at least the seeming infiltration of federal agents, and also a more confused ideology, probably the Trotskyist focus on world revolution, but not focusing on the thing that's prevented world revolution, these past 100 years, the fascist United States, but focusing on, say, another country outside of the United States as being the problem there. Of course, there is no bigger problem than the European descended fascist pig on the world stage, the ruling elite, who is tending to be upholding this Eurocentric paradigm, and who's tending to be from about 15 countries. Worst of these is the United States. So anyone telling you that they're world revolutionists, and then wanting to talk about a country that has progression toward a communistic outcome written quite clearly into their constitution, or any country outside of those 15 countries, and not overwhelmingly just saying the United States is essentially fascistic and always has been, that's a person that you can't trust. So the degree to which these two groups are infiltrated by CIA, three-letter agency types, and the degree to which they are merely just kind of worthless would be a matter of debate, but not good, right? That's it's a joke. Saw a few weeks ago when people started going onto an application called Red Book in Chinese, Red Note, after the TikTok banning debacle. And the joke was, a Chinese person says, I heard that 80% of the people in the Communist Party of the United States of America are federal agents. It must make it pretty hard to organize. How do you do it? Yeah, and that is the essential problem of the United States. It's just a garbage dump. As far as institutions are concerned, let's not extend that to all human beings. If you are a person who is pretty familiar with major works of scientific communism, and very, very few of you are, and you are not a person who is come to the cybernetic communist conclusion, I would recommend other books, such as ones about socialist planning or even decentral planning, such as ones about cybernetic socialist thought, like the works that I most frequently recommend of uh, Cockshott and Cottrell, and a handful of others. Cybermarks, you can find these books pretty easily. Um, if you've already read all of this, the Marxist canon and the cybernetic communist works as they stand, then I might recommend this book by Sandifer, Neoreaction, a Basilisk. But I think you do better in all things to try to work on the people's superintelligence and to opine about it. Um, I hadn't done this program for about a week, and one reason that sometimes that happens is I start trying to work in earnest on the people's superintelligence, and then decide to come back to this. Um, and um, but well, I'll go through some other books that I've read recently and their impression on me. Um, the um, I, I try to pretty well have an audiobook playing at all times. I don't only read in audiobook form, but really, overwhelmingly, I do because you can do more, right? You can be reading quite a lot. I tend to play almost any audiobook at 1.25 or sometimes 1.5 speed. And But sometimes I slow it down to regular speed, just as sometimes I'll listen to a book a few times, but usually not in succession. Um, um, and So you can read the old-fashioned way, and you should, I guess. But there is not really much difference there, except that listening to audiobooks, if they are works of serious thought, would allow you to do this while you're going about other business, and make better use of your time, and also do quite a lot more study. Um, and um, um, I read a book that was an anarchist work from the Institute of Anarchist Studies. And generally, when I'm reading something to do uh, with anarchist thought, it's to do with anarcho-syndicalist thought, because there's some overlap between this scientific communist project that I have undertaken, the cybernetic communist movement, and the anarcho-syndicalist set of strategies. As I said, the this people's superintelligence is more decentralized than it need have been. I contrast that with the CyberSyn project of Allende's Chile, which was being built in roughly from 1971 to 1974 in a physical form. A technological planned economy was being built, a thing that would have been truly transformative on the world stage, that was destroyed by the fascist United States, and a fascist dictator, as they have done so many times before, was installed, and since. Um, but that was a centralized project that I rather admired. As good a project as any that's been undertaken. Um, but being working toward building a humane and sustainable economic system in a centralized way on the part of a state actor is a thing that the global Eurocentric paradigm ruling elites, the fascists of this world, are pretty by 1971 had pretty well figured out how they could just dismantle it. Basically, at its first rumblings, you know, many such projects that is toward building a humane economic system have been dismantled at a far earlier stage than that of Allende's CyberSyn, the technological planned economy of Chile. Um, such as in the United States, just having um, every organization that could develop into more revolutionary formation being full of some number of saboteurs. Roughly 5% of every organization would be basically three-letter agency operatives. That's what it's like to live in contemporary fascistic milieu. Um, and So this Institute for Anarchist Studies work that I read also, if it's not tending to inform my cybernetic communism, another reason why I might read something more to do with anarchism would be in the interest of informing my ecological communism. These are the two most important things to be, in my view. Cybernetic communist and ecological communist. This was a book that left me with this one particular impression, which is, why are there no eco-communists? Why are there not people who are devoted to stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse really in this community in the way that anarchists are devoted to this? Why is there no communist equivalent to, let's say, the Earth Liberation Front, an affinity group that was actively waging war against the ecocidal capitalist sectors? And again, with all of these things, the main answer is because anytime people start doing this, they're undermined by fascist saboteurs. But another answer is because this is a failing of contemporary scientific communist formations and thought. So I would recommend that book in the same way that I would recommend the Sandifer book. Once you've already been, once you've read State and Revolution a few times and read the Marxist canon and read the other kinds of works that I would prioritize, then I might recommend this one to you. I'll put the links to both of these in here, however. Another book that I read that made an impression was to do more with this world after the cybersyn was sabotaged by the forces of essentially fascism in this world. And a cover of this book has a picture of one of the people most associated with that, Henry Kissinger, and others who died. Henry Kissinger, some 18 months ago, who died in his bed at 100 years old. A much better fate than any such persons deserve. And this book that I'm talking about was written by Holly Sklar, and it's called Reagan, Trilateralism, and the Neoliberals. And it's a shorter form work than the other two that I've discussed thus far, but it's still book length, only just. And but it's nevertheless worth your time, in a certain sense, more so than the other two, because it understands that focusing on the primary contradiction of private wealth is a good thing, and it understands that focusing on the ringleader of private wealth, of fascism, of anti-communism, the United States military-industrial complex, the United States government, is the thing to do. So I would tend to say that if you haven't read hundreds and hundreds of books to do with cybernetic communism and scientific communism already, you can still read that book if you've read just a few others. If you're more the person who's read State and Revolution and the Communist Manifesto and some of the works of Mao, and that's it, you can still read this book and not be wasting your time relative to the other books that you should be reading, in my humble opinion. Another book that I read in recent days that made a definite impact on me was called Direct Action, Protest, and the Reinvention of American Movements by L.A. Kaufman. And this is a book not so specific to scientific communism, almost in the same way that the one from the Anarchist Studies Institute was, but nevertheless, perhaps more parallel to it because it's describing this linchpin of world fascism, the American systems, and direct action against it. So that's a little more relevant in my view to staying focused on primary contradiction, which is not the state, as anarchists wrongly assert, but is private wealth. Although anarchists, serious anarchists, not anarcho-capitalist losers, but serious anarchists are, the closer they are to being communists, the less laughable they are, and that should be reason enough for you to not associate with anarchist thought, particularly in the United States, where this impulse to disdain the state over private wealth is essentially, it's a multi-billion-dollar cottage industry of pseudo-intellectual filth. So much so that you could say that this is of the three most significant political parties in terms of institutional influence of the past century. The United States, is a Republican Party, Democratic Party, and Libertarian Party. All of them are suffer from this failing, focusing on the problems of the state rather than the problems of financial capital and private wealth and empire. The latter deriving from the other problems, of course. And so the just as I will tend to describe a Christian socialist in the United States as being more criminal than a Christian socialist in another country that is not the Christian fascist nation causing the extinction of humankind, as the United States is, most assuredly, all of those things. So I would say that having this anarcho prefix in your name as a person from the United States is more criminal here than it would be elsewhere. But still, the thing to do is understand the necessity of ending financial capital above all things, and also the necessity of centering the liberation of the oppressed, the genesis of that project, right? There is no anti-establishment project, even in before recent centuries, that's not genuinely focused on the liberation of the oppressed. And if you do not see the ways in which people are oppressed, this is a group. This is opposed to the group called Norman Finkelstein, and so there is no conversation in this time about oppressed people without talking about the theft of Palestinian lands, the artifice of the so-called modern state of Israel, and how this is really violent invaders from Europe creating some flimsy pretext to set up an imperialist outpost in the Middle East. All of this is in service to financial capital, and little more than this. This is driven home when you look at conversations about Palestine, such as those brought into sharp focus by the United States' fascistic leader, Donald Trump, in saying that he is going to own Palestinian land and transform Palestine and Gaza, particularly, into some sort of resort and displace all of the 1.5 million Palestinians there, which before the events, as you know, of the last 16 months, there were roughly 2.3 million people in Palestine. So these forces of violent settler colonialism, the violent invaders of the Eurocentric paradigm, and the U.S. empire particularly, have killed the better part of 1 million people in the last year. That's not a statistic that's made up, because that's a number that the head of this empire, the fascistic leader of the United States, was using. Referred in passing to there being 1.5 million Palestinians. We know that before 2023 there were more than 2 million. And so it's the degree to which, it's 1.2 million people, or 400,000, 500,000, 600,000 people. It's a mass murder, unlike anything else in living memory that's occurred here. And I was thinking about this in the context of one of the other people that was mentioned in this book that I've been reading most recently, almost as much as anyone else. Those three kind of jokers that I mentioned, and one of the people associated with that co-wrote a book with Nick Land. That book you should not read, called 0 to 1. It's nonsense. And the ideology of this person who co-wrote that book, the archfiend of our times, in my opinion, Peter Thiel, also nonsense. But what is the difference between a neoreactionary like Nick Land, who is pacifistic in his thinking, but in bad faith, as most of these transhumanist folks are? You would say a person like a transhumanist, or like any liberal or any capitalistic person in the West, will tend to encourage you to only make changes to the system through the proper channels. That is to say, not to take arms and stop the capitalist climate apocalypse by any means necessary, but rather through some reformist action, because they know the system well enough to know that those reformist actions will easily be subverted by this fascistic system. So a pacifist, then, is a person doing more violence than anyone else in this world right now, because the pacifist is insisting that you allow the forces of omnicide, which are the forces of financial capital and empire, to continue to cause the extinction of our species in these 4 years that we have left. I did a whole thing where I talked about a person who is not a bad person relative to any of these people that I mentioned, a person more, as I said, probably close to the ideology of this person who I said I rather admire, Salvador Allende. And this person is not as famous as Salvador Allende, but he's more famous than Yohanan Ben Zion. His name is Professor Anthony Zenkis. And Anthony Zenkis, if you look at his work, if you look at his Twitter profile, it says that he is a pacifistic communist. You can understand this impulse, right? To build power outside of a lot of violent rhetoric that might lead a movement to explode. You can understand the logic there, just as you can understand the logic of studying scientific communism, because even though you want to be more engaged with the building of scientific communist organizations, but the organizations in your area are not seriously trying to do that. So you cannot say that Zenkus in his public profile is dead wrong, or is that he is that bad faith a pacifist that these others are. But you can say, looking at people generally, that if a person stipulates in advance that the only way to be a communist is not to take up arms against the fascists who are killing this planet, not just in general, as we would say of decades past, but in this limited time frame that we have left before we are all the Walking Dead, that is runaway overheating causing the near extinction or total extinction of humankind at some point. So after 2029, you will still be alive in all likelihood. But after 2029, if we do not transform the industrial bases of the West, particularly abolishing in this order the military industrial complexes, the petroleum sectors, and the livestock sectors, um, there is nothing left to you after 2029, in my view, for avoiding um, uh, near human extinction. That is the death of billions of people in the global south, and less so in the global north. That is a white supremacist action unlike any other. That's in process. That is what a person is upholding when they say they are a pacifist communist. That is a more violent position than saying I am willing to take direct action, even to the point of openly organizing an armed insurrection against the fascist United States. Um, I also read quite a number of books recently to do with uh, African studies and Pan Africanism. And so I will recommend those, but not at such length because this is getting a little long. I read Stephen Biko's I Write What I Like, recommend it above the others that I mentioned thus far. The Peasants' Revolt by Govan Mbeki, focusing on South Africa, which I also recommend above the others that I mentioned so far. I also read a book which I did not yet finish, but I would recommend above the others that I mentioned so far, called Socialist Somalia. I also read a book to do with land back movement for Indigenous people in Canada, which I can recommend some more relevant, only just, to the struggle against fascist empire, um, um, to do with land back in the United States. But if you've already read those and read other works, I would definitely recommend Disinherited Generations, Our Struggle um, to reclaim the treaties by um, Nellie Carlson and Kathleen Steinhauer. This book made an impression on me. If you are looking for something very similar to this to watch, perhaps while you're eating dinner, I could recommend a film called Bones of Crows, miniseries, television series, that is, might have actually been based on this book, or based on another quite similar work, which I also read. um, and But I can't think of it at the moment. Well, I've recommended some books. I hope that you um, take the time to study this world, and generally watching films from the Western world are not a way to do that. Generally reading fiction in the Western world, not a way to do that. Um, but Doing this thing where you reject bourgeois ideology on a daily basis, you must constantly combat liberalism, as um, um, good comrade Mao Zedong observed, and others have observed similarly. It's a constant project You must be ever vigilant. That's why I said when I became favorably inclined to communist thinking as a young person, I did not, but I count becoming a scientific communist as something that happened some nearly 30 years later. The difference between those two things is the study. And any person who would suggest that you not need to study to be a communist is a person engaging more with that failing that I described as the thinking of the anarchist. Um, and I read some other books to do with the problem of the United States recently. The Changing Face of Empire by Nick Turse. This was a little more tech focused actually, but in that hell world of the military industrial complex. The subtitle is Special Ops Drone Spies, and that pretty well sums up the hastening of the capitalist climate apocalypse. Coincides really with this military industrial complex becoming $1 trillion a year abomination with 700 full blown military bases around the world and thousands of military installations around the world, being the world's worst polluter. And this is something that Americans do not say nearly enough. Many of them realize it scarcely at all, just as they realize scarcely at all that Native Americans, the people who um, should be in control of this land as stewards of this entire continent, uh, Mexico, Canada, but most importantly, the United States, if we're to end the capitalist climate apocalypse and end the military industrial complex. Um, they scarcely recognize that these people still live. Native American people in the millions are still living. And the project that I've described at some length for land back, I was in 2024 and am now for 2028. Um, you can write me in as a presidential candidate. Perhaps that organization will be built out a little more between now and 2028. But I am a land back candidate calling for the abolition of the U.S. federal government. That could be done by a candidate, by executive order, which I've written, which would disband on day one the United States federal government. And basically, this is a method for getting rid of the military industrial complex, but no less important is it also a method for restoring to those thoughtful stewards, the indigenous people of North America, their rightful holdings. And you can't really prioritize one or the other. The original sin of the United States, the theft and murder of black and brown bodies, and this capitalist climate apocalypse are really one and the same project. And so you can write me in JOHANNON space BEN space ZION. It's my name, Yohanan Ben Zion. You don't have to write in a voice crying out in the wilderness for technological New Jerusalem, but you do have to write in those letters in my name. And I think if you do that, you're making a powerful statement for building a humane and sustainable economic system by destroying the thing which is preventing that, the U.S. evil empire. And if people were to join in this movement in a serious way as scientific communists, they would necessarily be moving toward actions very much like what I've described. The one that I've described is The one reform action that I can think of that would be of worth on the North American continent. And so that's why I've tended to prioritize it, but I would not prioritize it over this project of, say, 1 million people with AR 15s in hand, bivouacked outside of the White House or Pentagon, demanding an end to the capitalist climate apocalypse. Only such actions have brought about real change in the past. Only such actions have the realistic possibility of ending the capitalist climate apocalypse before it's too late after 2029. As I described, I tended to prioritize these two things, and also the cybernetic communist project of the Artifical Superintelligence. Those are my three jams. Um, I read a book that I would highly recommend um, um, by Farah Reza called Anti-Imperialism, a Guide for the Movement. Again, prioritizing the fight against the evil empire above all else. A work that I would less recommend than any of these probably, but that nevertheless did make an impression on me, was called The Arcades Project by Walter Benjamin. I've read other Walter Benjamin's works, and but this is more to do with the humanities. And I read another book that was more to do with the humanities or two recently. I guess I'll mention in passing. I'm just listing a lot of books that I read recently. I didn't finish this one, but it was called Corruption's Vampire by Alexander Cockburn. I don't really recommend that, but it is reasonably consistent with scientific communist thought. The more thing is to do with a lot of cultural jazz, the less it could possibly be to do with scientific communism. And you should understand that, because not failing to really understand that and center that and prioritize that is a form of bourgeois ideological baggage. A very, very popular one. Right now, everybody's talking about some event that happened at the Super Bowl to do with a man named Lamar, Kendrick Lamar, certainly a talented new African musician, but not a scientific communist. And events at this CIA-run filth to do with the NFL, absolutely not to do with scientific communism. And so to focus on some cultural shite, as opposed to, say, just disregarding it and lifting up your voice in service to the actual project of the new African nation, the liberation of the people living here. That's the real thing to do. Almost no one does that, but people will talk about black bourgeois celebrities all day long in the United States. It's no coincidence. That's a feature of this Project Mockingbird brainwashing. It's a feature of this bourgeois ideological baggage writ large across the land. Well, I'm not going to just keep listing books, because I could just keep going on and on. I have a long list of books. I will say that of the things that I have prioritized here, the let's say the three things that I prioritized toward the latter part of this conversation: a maneuver for the electoral dismantling of the U.S. electoral system and governance. This land back America's last president, Yohanan Ben Zion 2028 campaign, that's lower in the order of importance than the more genuine scientific communist project of taking up arms against this fascist government. That's a margin call, perhaps, because the people who would say this full-chested would be people who are not focused enough on the land back project, in my view. But even less of a margin call, in my humble opinion, is prioritizing this AI takeoff, advanced computing, being the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, and the thing which is the clincher in those 4 years that you have left between being able to build something powerful enough to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse by those methods of stopping the world's worst polluter, the military industrial complex, who is, of course, far worse than being the world's worst polluter because its only real job on the world stage is protecting all of the other super polluting corporations and formations, creating an inescapable regime of global superpollution and Eurocentric garbage. Um, and and so I would like to see those million people um, bivouacked outside of the White House with AR-15s in hand, demanding an end to the capitalist climate apocalypse, which necessarily means the end of the United States government. Um, but using this workforce multiplier of the people's superintelligence, this formation that I have theorized. I've not seen others discussing. I've never heard anyone else use the word people's superintelligence in that order. I've never heard anyone else really discussing cybernetic communism in a serious way. Now, a lot of people, very smart people, people with a lot more letters behind their name than Yohanan Ben Zion, have written about cybernetics and systems theory in the context of of um, um, revolutionary thought and action. We could class these people generally as neo-Marxists, but before 2024, there was not this thing, the open source large language model as human level AI agent. And so there was not a pathway to describing something like a people's superintelligence or building something like a people's superintelligence could have been described. And so you can, I guess, forgive people like Slavoj Žižek for just kind of focusing on just more cultural garbage or generally fanciful things. But in 2025, I don't think anyone should absolutely get a pass for not focusing on this most powerful revolutionary weapon in history. And the best, nearest term path to building a superintelligence, which is a people's superintelligence, that solves the problems that people like Yudkowsky have talked about for a long time, the problems of what fellow neoreactionary clown Elon Musk succinctly referred to as unleashing the dragon, unleashing the demon, opening Pandora's box. Um, that is advanced computing. But of course, these people are only concerned about its effect on uh, financial capital and empire. They are not concerned with the survival of the species. They prioritize wealth over the survival of the species already by being a part of this military-industrial abomination, the world's worst polluter, by upholding, is MIRI, the organization of Eliezer Yudkowsky, absolutely a part of the military-industrial complex? Yes, but not in the way that a person who's gotten mega billion-dollar contracts in total from the U.S. Military-industrial complex, like Musk is. Um, so, by and large, you cannot find a person talking about advanced computing in the United States or, for the most part, in the West who is not a person with a tremendous amount of the aforementioned bourgeois ideological baggage, preventing them from being a serious person, It's a difference between the neoreactionary of this, as it's understood today, the technological accelerationist, or the accelerationist more generally, and a cybernetic communist who would also be an accelerationist, but accelerating a good outcome rather than a merely destructive one. The building of this thing that I describe in the words that I like to use. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, my dear comrade, very soon cybernetic communism will win. If you can't see the difference between merely destroying or saying you want to destroy the evil empire and building something actually better in its place and not worse, like the installation of Peter Thiel as a god emperor of Earth, micromanaging a techno-fascistic AI system. We could build a thing that actually helps people, that has a similar power or greater power. I would say that the power of 8.3 billion people, thus superpowered, is greater than that of a few. And that is the difference between a people's superintelligence, a dramatic workforce multiplier. I think that even 1 million people in such a formation, a small fraction of those in any one of a number of social media concerns. There's 1 billion people on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on a handful of other such platforms, pushing up to or above 1 billion people. There's a number of these that have hundreds of millions or billions, or about 1 billion. And but the people's superintelligence is a more significant thing. It's a building of this workforce multiplier that I've described, and I will also share a link where I describe it in more technical terms and at greater length as well, so you can go right to that next if you made it to the end of this video, because that'll be the first at the top of the description here will be relating to superintelligence. Please watch those videos before you even read ever consider reading something like even a criticism of Nick Land, because it's not really prioritizing ending the evil empire before it's too late, as a focus on building a people's superintelligence, not a central idea for the scientific communism is praxis, that there is no difference between serious thought and serious action at a certain level, but there is a difference, right? There is a difference between you and a few people becoming smart enough to understand problems of financial capital and empire, and 1 million people that walked outside of the Pentagon demanding an end to the capitalist climate apocalypse. You can see how those two things are different, right? And this is why I'm not as dismissive of anarchists as I was in the past, because they are tending to be the people who understand that order of importance there, if not other things. And so this is all within our grasp. This workforce multiplier will lead to things like this people in this book that I've read most recently. Every single one of them, almost, and every single person in this movement would be described as a person who wants to achieve either digital immortality or biological immortality. Fuzzy notions, to be sure. Before the year 2025, in centuries past, if you said, I hope someday to be biologically immortal, that would be reason enough for you to be put in an insane asylum, perhaps, and perhaps rightly so, or certainly not taken very seriously. But we live in a world now where this AI powered effect, this workforce multiplier effect, could be applied to the public health service, the single payer public health service, becoming AI powered, could lead to not merely the curing of more and more disease, but even the curing of decrepitude itself, and applied to the masses. This would lead to an effect that I have also termed universal superlongevity, in contrast to the thinking of other people's focused on this outcome, who are not focused on this socialized outcome, this massified outcome, and so not serious people, right? A medical doctor in the United States, unless a person is pretty outspokenly against the U.S. medical system, and even if they are, what is a medical doctor in the United States but a person contributing to the death of about 100,000 people a year because of the United States for-profit death care system? Um, um, Organizations, not least of these, like the slain CEO of United Healthcare. What is this? This is rent seeking, right? Um, 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 Taking an important service and adding a middleman who need not be there. That's the description of United Healthcare, and certainly I think if you understand all of that, you can understand the actions of a person like the CEO Slayer, who is the person being held for this person named Luigi Mangione. Not 100% convinced that he did it, and I'm a little confused about what's really going on there, but it's a matter for another conversation. This achievement of universal superlongevity in your lifetime, not in the year 2525, when if man is still alive, but in your lifetime, is a thing worth fighting for. Just as outcomes, even beyond the building of a livable world, and even beyond universal superlongevity, outcomes like the wonders to behold beyond imagining, such as pushing up on Comrade Kardashev's scale into a spacefaring civilization. Once human misery and want are a thing of the past and not a moment before. Once instability is a thing of the past, effectively, not a moment before. That's climate instability. Um, Once we have achieved this full communist outcome, a thing eminently possible only if you prioritize cybernetic communists' ideology as I've described it, because what is that thing? The failing of centuries past and decades past of not being able to envision the full communism was no bigger failing than that of Slavoj Zizek in focusing on cultural bullshit and not articulating in people's superintelligence. Right? It didn't have a thing like systems thinking, systems theory, or more importantly, the advanced systems themselves, and so they were just groping in the dark. But you, sir, or madam, or other, you are not consigned any further to groping in the dark, because you can advance the scientific communist project and the liberation project by understanding that advanced computing is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history and become a cybernetic communist revolutionary today.